Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Gates, an alcoholic. I was chatting with our senior member over here. You know, if you're going to stay sober that long, 30 years between drinks, a person might as well quit drinking altogether. And it's a funny thing. I reading a little humor column the other day there, and talking about some little boy who said he could easily be the fastest one in his class, except for another kid who runs better than he does. Now, that's sort of the way it is here. I have been speaking in Alcoholics Anonymous, drunk and sober, for over 30 years. It's a shame he outranks me. You should have heard some of the tapes I made before my last slip. God, they were beautiful, inspirational things. When I was new in AA, I knew so much. The wisdom and the insight that was there, the subtle nuances that are cognizable only to the slipper, really. Now I have been sober so long that almost everything I do is filler, because it seems like AA has become such a simple program designed to treat with such a simple disorder. Today it seems to me that there has never been a problem to have afflicted mankind that is as easily recognizable and treatable as alcoholism. The very name alcoholism gives you such a marked clue as to what the problem is. If you weren't handicapped with a degree in psychology, and someone were to come up to you and say, "What do you think causes alcoholism?" I warrant you would be right on the first guess. Alcohol? Right. But if you have been educated overly much, the chances are quite probable you will guess wrong. You may, for example, guess bowel training as the source of the problem. Failure to close an Oedipus triangle. The decadence and decline of petty bourgeois religion. I once saw an article that said it might be due to smog. It drives people in off the streets to the bars. And yet it is so apparent that if alcohol had never been invented, there wouldn't be one alcoholic recognizable or identifiable as such on the face of the earth. And our book tells us the only thing that distinguishes the alcoholic from the non-alcoholic is the phenomenon of craving that results from taking the first drink. Other than that, nothing. We don't have any different emotions than the non-alcoholic. We don't have any different psychic problems or spiritual difficulties. It's a fearful thing, really, to think that 9 out of 10 people are going to remain as we were when we were drinking. The world is in the hands of the non-alcoholic, and it's a frightening thing. See, they can go on clinging to those dubious luxuries, as our book characterizes them, of resentment and self-pity that we have to give up. You know, we are forced to live in the way that has been recommended by every saint, every sage, every elder of the village, every philosopher, every thoughtful person who ever reflected on how one should live in order to have a happy and contented life. That sort of thing is forced upon us. And we don't want to do that. I mean, we're like the non-alcoholic. We're not going to give up a lifetime of failure without a struggle. And it's a frightening thing because, see, alcoholic, we're not real menaces to society. Even at the height of our drinking, we weren't. Oh, I mean, we bloodied the highways and jammed the divorce courts, crowded the prisons and the mental hospitals, and broke the hearts of everybody we came in contact with. But we didn't endanger Western civilization. We're not that well organized. See, it's the non-alcoholic who does that. You know, I watch them downtown where I work, walking around, their knuckles white, their jaws clenched. Gonna get even, gonna pay back. Look out for number one, baby. Gonna get that bitch on the stand, make her admit she's an unfit mother right in front of the children. Yeah. And they never have to change. They never change. Why should they? What do they get? Lockjaws, ulcers, that's all. Nobody gets arrested for driving while pissed off. No one has ever been booked for being a common mope, you know, whining and disorderly. You get picked up for being drunk. And so as a result of it, we are forced, against our better judgment and against our will, to live the way that leads to a contented life. You know, nobody ever talks these days, it seems like, about the physical aspect of it, the fact that it is a physical disorder. 1 out of 10 people who have it. And it has nothing to do with your race, creed, color, sexual religion, or sexual preference, or religion, or intellectual background, or anything else. You know, we haven't had 10 guys walk on the face of the moon yet. One of them's already in AA. You know, they check those fellas fairly close. If they're not wired right, they're not out there. But that doesn't mean, of course, that we don't have psychotics on our program. Of course we do. Why should they get off any easier than the rest of us? In fact, if you're truly mentally ill and are able to stay sober, the chances are you'll become a leader in AA. A true guru, start groups and have many babies. Now, being mentally ill is no handicap, but it's not a requirement. It's a physical problem. And yet, I know even in a meeting like this, there are probably still people sitting there wondering if they're alcoholic. Wonder if I'm really alcoholic. You know, as if their opinion on the subject meant a crap. I mean, seriously, what difference would it make? What a diabetic thought about his condition? Or what a man with hemorrhoids, what difference what his view of the subject would be if he could get into a position to view it? You know, what difference could it possibly make? You know, and, your opinion of the subject its only relevance is it determines how you're going to die, whether you're going to die in the gutter chewing your tongue, despised by everybody who knows you, or whether you're going to die after a relatively contented and fruitful life. But that's a decision that probably doesn't mean a heck of a lot except to you. Alcoholism may be one of society's answers to overpopulation. I don't know. You know, I'm not going to deprive one of their inalienable right to suffer, but on the other hand, if there is anyone here who has any doubts about whether they're an alcoholic or not, it's so simple to find out. All they need do is ask themselves one question and answer it truthfully, and they'll have the answer. I mean, if there is anyone here who still has some lingering doubt, ask yourself this one question. Be candid about your reply. Just ask this. Am I now, or have I ever been, in attendance at an AA meeting? There's your answer. Non-alcoholics do not come to AA meetings. In the history of our organization, we've never had any social drinkers come into AA. What the hell would they come here for? Be like a virgin going in for a rabbit test. The thing is utterly absurd. If you're here, of course you're an alcoholic. You may be other things too. You know, a number of people came around and denounced me before the meeting. I've been speaking so long that people come up and tell me what to say and what not to say. One guy came up and said, you know, he doesn't like these things about people saying they're addict alcoholics and so on. And you know, he blamed me. He said, you know, you judges send people to AA. I never send anybody to AA. And I understand this addict alcoholic. It's a necessary prelude, because no one today who comes to Alcoholics Anonymous is going to be a pure alcoholic. In other words, no one under age 40 is a pure alcoholic anymore. There's too much better living through chemistry available now for them possibly to... Well, I'm 41, so... But today, there's all sorts of things available. They weren't available in my day. I was always able to resist everything but temptation, and no one ever offered me anything. I didn't even know about it. I was like a guy I heard the other day. He said all he knew was that Spanish fly was an upper and saltpeter was a downer. You know, it was, but if any of this stuff had been available, I'd have tried it. I can't imagine a real alcoholic, if someone comes up to them and says, here, try a couple of these, they'll get you there quicker, saying, no thank you, I'm killing myself with this. Yeah, of course you're going to take whatever's out there. And it's necessary, as the young ones come in, for them to go through that transitory redundancy of saying, I'm an alcoholic addict. See, it is redundant, of course. It's like saying, I live in Lancaster, in the state of California. You know, of course, it's ridiculous. Of course you're an alcoholic, you're an addict. What do you think booze is? You think we were social about it? The only thing I get caught up in sometimes is that there are meetings where they are so detailed. There's one in Hollywood, kind of a strange meeting. A lot of strange meetings in Hollywood, actually. But this particular one, it's called Anything Goes or something like that. And they not only say they're alcoholic addict, they mention their other drugs of preference. And it's rather amazing to sit there and listen to them. You have to be a pharmacologist almost to understand some of it. But the meeting that I attended, where I was speaking, they got into a kind of a competitive thing, and they began to boast about the things they took. And finally a lady got up. She was obviously very affluent, well-to-do, because she was dressed in tatters, and you would have to be rather rich to go out in the street looking like that. And she said, in a braggadocio way, I'm only into freebase cocaine. And I thought, oh, the poor dear. She'll never know the joy of a week's run on Muscatel. See, that form of specialization is frightening, really. It's like a koala bear. They run out of eucalyptus, they're screwed. But we have to make room for the new generations as they come in, and I'm delighted that they are still finding that it works. The non-alcoholic, as I mentioned earlier, they're no different than we are in their emotions or their psyche and so on. There have been no new emotions invented in the last 10 millennia. If you hear a speaker talk about his emotional problems, he's either talking about things that are unique with him, and they may or may not be common to anybody else, or he's talking about problems which are unique to all mankind. See, we often get up and discuss the secondary part of our problem, because there's no use talking about your alcoholism as such, because what the hell, you can't do anything about it, you got it, you're going to die with it. And there isn't anything to say about it. So we talk about the secondary part of it, which is the compulsion, the obsession. And that's defined in our book, too. It says the great obsession is what? The great obsession of the abnormal drinker is the persistence, the illusion that somehow, someday, he's going to control and enjoy it. And so we keep going back again and again and again. If we were just physically alcoholic, we wouldn't need AA. I've known people who were just physically alcoholic. They didn't come to AA meetings. You know, why would they? I remember I worked on the railroads for a while, and under the railroad system, I think it's Rule G or something, if you drink on the job, you're allegedly subject to immediate termination. And it was a holiday, and I had a jug, naturally, and I offered it to a co-worker, and he said, "No, thank you." And I thought, uh-oh, company think. I said, "What's the matter, fellow? Why won't you drink with me?" And he said, "Why, don't worry, go right ahead. It's okay with me, no problem. Go right ahead." But I tried it when I was younger, and sometimes it was all right, but other times I was just a madman. I did the damnedest thing, just went crazy. Got into the worst goddamn mess you ever saw. And I said, "Look, fellow, I asked you a fair question. I would like a fair answer. That happens to me all the time. Now, why won't you take a drink?" See, a normal person would not persist in pursuing anything that did to them twice what booze did to me 20, 40, 200, 400, 2,000, I mean, I kept going back again and again because I had the secondary part of it, the obsession. And that's what our program is designed to deal with, and that's what our speakers are talking about. Their own emotional hang-ups, or those emotional hang-ups that afflict all human creatures, they have to keep them below the spell of storm so that they don't break out in another drunk where their obsession gets away from them. And so they say, in other words, they will say things like, "I was very insecure. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night fearful that I couldn't make it in the competitive world." That's not an alcoholic problem, that's a human problem. All human beings are insecure and uncertain whether they can make it I'm sure the Caesars and the Pharaohs sometimes awoke in the middle of the night, thought, "Who am I fooling with this stupid laurel wreath? I'm no Caesar, just an Italian kid trying to get by," and they come by. This is a natural thing. Sometimes our speakers will get up and they describe purely human conduct. They'll say, "Oh yes, even when I was as young as 13, I didn't feel mature." Or sometimes they describe their own particular hang-ups. And you may or may not identify it. It isn't important, but the only danger is sometimes they will make it very broad. Like I remember one guy, I can't quite hear what they're saying over there, can you? I wish they'd either speak up or be quieter. We had a guy, when I was new in the program, he used to look out at the audience and he would say, "If you want to make this program, you're going to have to admit you're a thief, because all alcoholics are thieves." And this disturbed me very much because I didn't steal money. I stole people's friendship and their time and their compassion and so on, but I didn't actually steal money, and it disturbed me. And then I thought, well, he doesn't know all alcoholics. How many alcoholics could he possibly know? A few hundred? So when he says something about all alcoholics, he really isn't telling anything about all alcoholics, but he's telling something about himself. See, anybody who says all men are thieves and I'm a man, I know something about him. And we've both been sober a long time now, and I've never lent him any money, and we've got along fine. Boy, he's burnt some newcomers you wouldn't believe. It was a wonderful thing to watch him. And I remember another guy used to look out at the audience and say, "The first thing you're going to have to do if you want to stay sober is admit you're a latent homosexual." Well, boy, this really shook me. I was trying to quit drinking. And here's this guy telling me I'm going to have to give up boys. I'd never even tried them. As far as I knew, they might be the answer. I mean, my wife, Jesus Christ. And then I realized he didn't know all alcoholics, but I learned something about him. We've both been sober a long time. So what you hear from the podium is really not a description of your alcoholism per se. It's a description of the problems that we're going to have. And non-alcoholics have those problems. The only real difference between the non-alcoholic and the alcoholic, of course, is because they don't have the phenomenon of craving that results from taking the first drink, their lives are different. You know, they're odd. I discovered after I stopped drinking something I had not previously suspected. As far as I know, all of my family is made up of low-bottom social drinkers. They're the kind who take a beer, maybe 2 drinks, and quit. On a festive occasion, they might even take 3. Then the ladies' eyes, you know, they get that warm glow and their toes will tap a little tattoo on the carpet. But if you say, would you have another? They say, oh, no, I'm beginning to feel it. Think of the reasoning that underlies a statement like that. See, alcohol has to be about as vile a commodity as you can put in your mouth and swallow and still survive. It just tastes terrible. Occasionally you'll get a person, usually relatively new, who will say, I enjoyed the taste of a good bourbon. They have not reflected on that. Do you remember what bourbon tasted like the first slug? I'm not talking about the 8th or the 10th when you could have drunk horse urine and it wouldn't have mattered. I'm talking about that first slug of good hot raw whiskey. How it would go down, you rip the sides of your larynx, hit your stomach, you know, that nauseating splash that would make you twist and shudder. You know, everything in you wants to throw it back up again. But if you could just keep it down there, you know, it shake, you know, like a dog, or, you know, like a man leaving a urinal, that involuntary twitch. And if you could just keep it down, boy, then you get the dry heaves and diarrhea. You know, here is this stuff so, God, unless you mix it or slice it down to the place it's hardly worth drinking, it's damn near unpalatable. Oh, you can sell a near beer now and then, but could you imagine selling a non-alcoholic bourbon? You know, all it'll do is make you gag and throw up. It's wonderful. The non-alcoholic takes this stuff that is so vile and so expensive it'll almost bankrupt you, and then as soon as it begins to do that which God and man designed it to do, they quit. If there's any hope for those people, it doesn't lie in our organization. See, we may have our foibles and our hang-ups, but we're not totally devoid of reason. When we drank intoxicants, by God, we can proudly say we became intoxicated. You know, I had a non-alcoholic relative one time invite me into his house for a drink, and as we passed over the threshold, he said, now let's see, I've got a bottle in here somewhere. He, honest to God, didn't know where in the house he kept his stash. It was that insignificant to him. All he remembered was that they'd had a lot of people over for a Christmas party, and to make sure there was plenty of hooch for everybody, he'd bought a whole 5th. And the party not having been too raucous, there was naturally some left. He recalled the toast at New Year's. I mean, that was it to him. Now, I don't, and no non-alcoholic has ever wanted for a second to be a social drinker. Occasionally a newcomer will say, I'd like to be a social... Nonsense. An alcoholic's idea of purgatory, I suspect, would be a series of Sunday afternoons where you had 2 beers and stopped. You know, with that pounding behind the eye, the chest going and no place to move. Just terrible. All we can do is say, thank God we are not as other men are, I guess. By the way, I don't mean to make fun. I noticed there were a lot of Al-Anons who did raise their hands. I didn't mean to make fun of you. You're not at fault. You seem to have been born that way. It's... You know, I almost hate to do it, but somebody did ask. I used to tell a story. I don't talk about my drinking anymore because it doesn't tell what I used to be like. People get up and they give a drunkalogue under the guise of telling what they used to be like. It really doesn't. It tells what happened to you. You're not like that, for God's sakes. I never knew anybody who did it on purpose. I didn't want to even be an alcoholic. I never walked into some consular's office and said, I think I'd like to major in vomiting, perhaps with a minor in diarrhea. I never planned an evening the way it went. You know, the word intoxicated comes from the word toxic. Toxic means poisonous. When you put a toxic substance in your system, if you put very much in, you will become poisoned, to wit, intoxicated. And then your poisoned mind in its senses will look out and perceive the world as the world is not. And then your poisoned mind will draw illogical conclusions from this false data, and your control mechanism being gone, you will act upon this bizarre material. You know, I never planned a weekend the way it went. I never said to myself, well, let's see, it's Friday night. What'll we do? I got about a pint here in the house. I think I'll kill that, and then I'll go out and total a car. I've just canceled the insurance, and to save a little money, that'll be a good start, and perhaps on the way to the hospital, the ambulance intended to roll me, so I'll have no identification. I have to spend 24 hours down in General, but on the way home, I can cuff another jug, and I can terrorize the wife and children all day Sunday afternoon. That would be a good deal. Let's get it on. I mean, it's manifest that I am far too sophisticated and urbane to do a thing like that, but it happened to me. The only thing was that for a long time, I didn't realize, strange as it may seem, what was causing it. Or I guess maybe if I did realize it, I didn't want to admit it, because most of the conflict that you get into with society, even while drinking, involves other people. And if they weren't doing something, the problem wouldn't have happened. For example, you can rationalize each incident as it occurs. You can say, if he hadn't have made a left turn when he did, I wouldn't have hit him. Which is true, but if you hadn't have been bombed out of your gourd, you'd have seen he was making the left turn for half a block earlier, and, you know, an unguided missile coming down the street here. Or if he hadn't have said what he said about our beloved president, I wouldn't have a broken nose. Which again is true, but if I hadn't have been smashed, he might not have made his point so tellingly. You can rationalize all those, but eventually, as you keep drinking, things will begin to occur that it is almost impossible to blame others for. And the first one that occurred to me, and I used to do this shtick a lot, somebody asked me about it, and it was the first insight I had that there might be something wrong that didn't involve other people and their errors. And this particular thing that gave me a glimmer of insight occurred early one morning. See, I drank primarily to relax. And on this particular occasion, I'd been relaxed about 4 or 5 days. And I awakened from a deep sleep in which I had been visited with a nightmare of hellish proportions. It was like Dante's Inferno. There was imps of the perverse and Satan himself and boiling heat, and I awoke and I was just drenched with perspiration. And I kind of staggered up and looked around, tried to figure out what was happening and where I was, and I saw that I was on a couch in the front room. Apparently the family had retired some hours or days earlier in the bedroom, and I hadn't had nodded off on the couch, apparently with a cigarette in my hand, because coming from the couch through that tacking covering they have on it was a little spire of smoke. And I realized then that I didn't need to worry. There was nothing wrong with my drinking. What had happened was that I had nodded off with this cigarette, and it had fallen on there, burnt its way through into the matting, where, lacking oxygen to take flame, it had slowly spread. The coals and embers had spread until they now encompassed the entire couch, and there was nothing wrong with me. It was just that I had been barbecued for a period of time. And realizing this, I then moved to do something about it. I went into the kitchen and got a large pitcher of water and came back and tried to pour it into that tiny hole. And all it did was make a rather spectacular cascade onto the carpet. And I knew more stringent measures were called for, so I again went to the kitchen, came back with a butcher knife, and I slashed the couch from one end to the other, laid open the embers, and then doused them successfully with this cooling balm of the water. And it did subdue them. The only thing was it also filled the room with kind of an acrid black smoke. And I can remember, even to this day, really standing there, my eyes wet in the damn smoke, looking at that slashed and sodden mess, and realizing that almost to a certainty my wife was going to notice it. She was a very keen-eyed woman. There was little that passed her ken around that house, I'll tell you. And though she was a good woman, she would sometimes, in moments of exasperation or surprise, say things that would be unkind to her husband. You know, she didn't want to do that. She didn't want to attack the masculinity of her mate because she was a good woman, but sometimes she would become perturbed and forget herself and say things that she would later regret. Like, she might say something cruel, like, "You drunken son of a bitch, you did it again." Something like that. And naturally, I wanted to spare her this. And so I thought, well, what'll I do? The only thing that occurred to me was I will just take the damn couch out of the house. I mean, I knew she might vaguely remember there had been something on that side of the room, but out of sight, out of mind. And the only thing is, it was a bed couch, and I'd been relaxed for 4 or 5 days. I should be checking into a sanitarium, not moving furniture, but with that Herculean strength that comes only to the panic-stricken alcoholic, I somehow managed to heft that monstrosity onto my shoulder and lurched out the front door. We lived in the second-floor apartment at the time. It had a very small balcony, and I remember it had columns. I almost beat myself to death caroming off the post, you know, bung, 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 trying to make the turn. I got down into the patio, and foresight not being your strong suit at that moment, I hadn't realized how few places there are one can conceal a couch. And so I'm standing there with legs quivering, holding a couch. Should be in a hospital. And I remembered a creek about 5 miles away. So I staggered to my car and I threw the couch up on top of it. And then I got in and proceeded to drive to this place of disposal I'd selected. Well, by this time it was 6:30 or 6:45 or something in the morning. It was daylight out, and there were people on the bus stops as I drove along. You know, lunch pails and briefcases, things. I have no idea how they can stay up that late, but they're out there. And as I drove along, I noticed that their heads turned and followed my progress. Eyes wide, mouths agape. You know, now all I ever wanted was dignity. I didn't mind disaster a hell of a lot if I could face it with dignity. And here was this. You know, I thought, God, it doesn't take much to draw a crowd in California, I can say that. Until I chanced to pass a mirror-like window. It was a dusty window that acted as a reflective device, like a mirror on an auto display shop. And I could see what it was they were looking at. Here was this car driving down the street, driven by a man with a 4-day growth of beard, nattily attired in a bathrobe. And on top of his car, he had a couch, which previously had not had enough oxygen to take fire, but now going down the street like billows, 35 miles, the air was going through it. The flames were 20, 30, 40 feet, right up in the air. You know, and when I got back finally to the house, I had a hard time really blaming my sleeping wife and children for having endangered their lives like that. Later, however, I was to pass beyond social drinking. You know, I really wonder why we do pursue it. Oh, in some ways I know, some ways I don't. Why that obsession is with us. It, as I say, it has nothing to do per se with your thinking, obviously. You know, the closest I could come to what I used to be like, I saw on Channel 28, you know, those educational shows, They did a thing on the brain. Now, science has made incredible discoveries about how the brain functions nowadays. They're even able to localize the specific areas in the brain that produce certain sensations. And I watched this show with great fascination until they got to the part where they were showing what happens with those, what they called the pleasure centers. There are certain areas of your brain which, when stimulated, produce a euphoric sensation. And they had this little white rat in there. They always have little white rats in these things. And he had 2 electrodes sticking out of his skull. They had bored little holes in his skull and put those electrodes in there so that they were touching his pleasure centers. And then they had neatly arranged it so that on each side of this somewhat lengthy cage, there were little trip hammers, little levers that he could push down with his nose, and when he did, he would get a sensation. A very tiny little jolt would hit it, and it'd give him a sensation of pleasure, euphoria. And he would do it 3 times and get 3 little tingles, and then it would stop, and he would have to go to the other end, where he could then push that pedal 3 times. And he quickly learned it, and he would go back and forth. God, was he happy. And then they did the thing that they do to all animals in those test things. There's a certain sadistic cruelty really in there. What they did was they put a grid. They took out the floor and put a metal grid across the whole center of this cage. And then they plugged that grid into the wall. So it gave off a horrible electric shock. In fact, the shock was so intense that no rat in history, in their experiments, they had never had a rat cross that voluntarily. It was that high, a jolt. In other words, they could have a rat on one side, hungry, and put food, fragrant food, on the other. He wouldn't cross it. He would stay on his own side and starve to death. Or they could put a lady rat over there, or a male rat, depending on his preference. But it didn't matter what it was that they put over there. Neither love nor money would get him to cross that thing. But then they take our little rat, who is now conditioned to getting his fix, and they put him on there, and he went traipsing over, tap, 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 pushed it down, whee, push it, whee. I've got to stop doing that. I've been sober several decades, and honesty, rats do not go hee. I've been sober several decades, and honesty, rats do not go hee. There is nothing more phlegmatic than a rat. You will never tell from looking at his face whether he's having a good time or not. A rat is very much like an alcoholic. It's only in the movies where alcoholics put lampshades on their heads. See, that's what social drinkers do. They have a beer or two and they want you to see that they're having a good time, so they put a lamp on their head and sing. Alcoholics don't do that. They sit quietly in the corner of the room. They know at all times where their drink is and how much is in it. They know where your drink is and how much is in it. Come the shank of the evening, you better watch it. Alcoholics often drink together. They do not share. It's catch as catch can. But they are never going to display any emotion about it. They want you to think they're wasting their money. God, there was nothing more militant than I leaving a bar stool after 18 beers to go to the John, Might trip over a cigar butt, but I didn't stagger. The drunker I got, the more carefully I enunciated my words, lest you think I was not wasting my money. So this rat really doesn't show anything, but I did identify with him. It seemed to me like he was going, hee hee hee. And he got his 3 little jolts, and then he started traipsing over to the other side. And he hit that damned electrified grid. And it was terrifying to watch him. He just went straight up in the air like a, the hair just stood out because, oh, hell, he's getting electrocuted. Why shouldn't it? But it just stood out, And he came back down, and you could just see him standing there. And then he didn't know what the hell to do. He didn't understand that, but he realized, ooh, that smarts, that hurts. And then he paced back and forth because he had to get another drink. He had to. This wasn't some silly little thing like food or sex. He had to get another hit. And I sat there and watched him, as he paced back, and finally he worked up his nerve enough, and he hit that thing at a dead, he went across, it looked like a little kangaroo. He got on the other side, and he went up to his pedal and he pushed it down. Oh, thank you, bartender, I needed that. Damn. 3 times, and then it stopped. And he looked back at that damn grid again. Oh, no. It was horrible to watch him because he had to do it. And they kept the camera on him, and finally, after a while, hell, he got to where he hardly paid any attention to it. I mean, if you didn't know what had happened previously, you'd have thought he loved pain. He'd just lower his head and get that damn thing, And I sat there watching him go back and forth suffering, and I identified. I said, I finally heard my story. That's what I used to be like. Just unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Now, I don't quite know exactly. Now, the solution, by the way, to alcoholism, of course, is so simple. I probably should say something about booze while I'm here. But, to stop drinking is so self-evident. All you need to stop drinking is the ability to control the movement of your elbow. Newcomers sometimes will, in a question and answer meeting, raise a shaky hand and say, how do you really stop drinking? As if there's some kind of magic to it. As if some fairy is going to touch you with a wand. I've had that happen down in Hollywood, actually. Nothing unpleasant about it, really. It's great fun, but it won't stop you drinking. Or as if some evangelist was going to lay on hands and say, out thou demon rum, and you'd never want it again. It doesn't happen like that. All you have to do is control the movement of your elbow. Now, you may be so far gone that spastic-like, your hand hurls things toward your face from time to time, but if you can fend them off, eternal sobriety is yours. If you can distinguish water from vodka, you're smart enough. The only thing is you won't want to do it as long as that obsession is at work. And the solution to it is so simple. Like the Chinese water torture, at every meeting they read a portion of our book which also has the subtle caption, How It Works. And they mean it. That's how it works. Those steps are so simple, so self-evident, so straightforward, I don't believe you could become confused concerning them nor their operation unless you went to a step study meeting. I really don't. I mean, they were written when Bill, the author, had been sober less than 5 years. Nobody else had more than a year, and they said, these are the steps we took. If they weren't lying to us, when did they take them? Took them in the first year. They didn't know anything about 10, 20, 30 years of sobriety. They didn't know anything about the gurus we have down in L.A. now, who can't find their ass with both hands but lead the multitudes and so on. They didn't know anything about that. They wrote the steps, and they were meant to be taken. And they work. The only thing is they don't appeal to the intellect. I came in here, I looked at that first step, and the first step says not that you're an alcoholic. Hell, I admitted that many years before I stopped drinking. That explained why I drank the way I did. But it says you would admit you are powerless over alcohol. Now, that's a horrible concept, powerlessness. All of our lives we've been told, don't quit. Never say die. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. If you don't succeed at first, try again. To give up, to surrender, to admit to powerlessness, that like some leaf you can be caught by a passing wind, twisted, turned, having no control, deposited at will. That's an awful admission. It wasn't in my lexicon at that time, I'll tell you. The second and third steps, they talked about God, even though they tried to hide it by saying, as you understand it, or higher power. I knew what they were talking about. They were talking about something I'd rejected as a teenager. They were asking me to step off into a void to be supported by something I knew to be non-existent. I mean, that doesn't require intelligence to take. That's an act of sheer desperation. In fact, you won't do it until your life becomes unmanageable. The fourth and fifth steps, by the way, I now see that it wasn't my quarrel with organized religion that kept me from taking the second and third steps. It was, I did not grasp spirituality. We tend to judge people by the length of their car, the depth of their ready reserve bank account, the size of their home or something. We really don't judge people by what they're worth without their material possessions, or at least I didn't. Someone once said, Don, to talk spirituality to you is like talking motherhood to a bull. He's not against it, he just isn't equipped to grasp it at some sort of a meaningful level. But the fourth and fifth steps I readily understand and understood then. I mean, like one of our people here, I'm an attorney, and I was at that time, and I don't put anything down in writing without considerable reflection. And when I do, it is not going to be a catalog of my sins, crimes, felonies, misdemeanors, acts of disloyalty, and breaches of trust. That's the first thing they tell you in law school: never do nor allow a client to do. That is not the way to avoid problems, that is the way to ensure them. Or if they would say that by doing it you might get some sort of an overall perspective of your life, but surely then you would take those shameful sheets, would you not? Burn them, stomp the ashes into the dust? No. AA says you immediately run with them to some blabbermouth, tell them all about it, lay yourself open to a lifetime of certain blackmail. Now that does not really appeal to the intellect. Our Supreme Court stays up nights trying to find ways to keep people from taking a fifth step. You can't make a confession which is admissible in a court of law unless it's made in the presence of 2 lawyers and 3 nuns. And what if you do them all, what happens then? Then you get to the 8th and 9th steps. You'll have a list of people that you can make amends to. After all they've done to us, we make amends to them. I mean, you talk about injustice. I mean, they smote us the 99 blows, and if we retaliated maybe with a little backhanded slap, we make amends to them. I never met a newcomer who wasn't like I was when I got here. Kind, loving, gentle. Like Keith, who spoke last night, a person who knows the answers for mankind, like one of our ex-presidents who used to say, come, let us reason together. Let us do it my way. And the sons of bitches won't do it. And now we have to make amends to them. I mean, the injustice of that still rankles. When I first got here, I couldn't even think of a person to make an amend to. Oh, it troubled me. It really did. I thought, you're not perfect, are you? It was a hard question because all the evidence seemed to point in that direction. And I finally thought of one guy, and I then wrote him a letter. It said, Dear sir, I've joined an organization which is part of our discipline, requires that if any way I've hurt or offended another human being, I should promptly apologize. I therefore wish to say I'm sorry that I shot you. If I can be of further service to you in the future, however, please do not hesitate to call upon me. I've been damn near 30 years. That guy hasn't even replied. Since then, by the way, I've thought of others to make amends to. Everybody I had ever met, that's who. Everybody I ever met. You monkey with an alcoholic, it's much like fondling a toad. The best you can hope for is warts. God, everybody who comes near us gets it. And we mean so well. God damn, we mean well. Then if we don't understand the non-alcoholic, they sure don't understand us. Sometimes they even accuse us of lacking willpower. That's the most idiot. Alcoholics have more willpower than anybody you can ever believe have. Our tenacity almost defies description. The reason they get confused is they think we want to quit drinking. Great. Yeah. But if you do all these things, then you arrive at step 12, which as I first read it, said I would then be entitled to get up at 3 in the morning to call on some drunk who was going to puke on my shoes. And I thought, boy, there's a soft sell. That's an inspirational thought, because the more I drank and the weaker and more hopeless I became, the more I hated people who drank and became weakless. And now I'm going to spend my life on. I just couldn't see it. I remember going ahead into the book, into the vision for you. I thought this might have slightly more appeal. Visions often do. And there they say if you do those steps, which they call somewhat quaintly putting your house in order, it said, surely you will meet with some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. And I thought, trudge. I mean, of all of the verbs in the English language that can be used to characterize locomotion, they pick out trudge. See, I didn't ask for skip, come-a-loo, waltz, trapesy. down the road, but surely you could stride purposefully like a man. Trudge. I mean, that's right out of Rudyard Kipling. Boots, 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 marching up and down again, foot slogging over Africa. There's no end to the war. Trudge. I mean, when I was younger, I would occasionally have someone come up to me and say, "You come with me, fella, I'm a swinger, I'm a goer." I never had anybody say, "You come with me, I'm a trudger, we'll hit her together." See, fortunately, there's a solution to these intellectual quibbles, and that's to keep drinking. The booze is the great proselytizer, the great message carrier. It isn't the speakers or even our book. It's booze. That's what wears down the point on the intellectual's head, through friction against the gutter if need be. At the end of my drinking, I wasn't even getting into trouble. How much trouble can you get into in a hotel room with a bottle of wine and a copy of Playboy? A complete man, except I've been in there for a month. I'm dying. The maid doesn't step on me, I'm safe. But I'm immobile. And I suddenly remember those people in AA, and they're trudging. Ooh, boy, boogie, man, go. I mean, when you can't move, that trudge is a pretty good pace, I'll tell you. And so then, in desperation, you try the steps, and they work. They always do. In my early days, they used to say, you don't have to believe the steps work. The steps are like X-lax. You can be as agnostic about the efficacy of X-lax, atheistic even. You don't have to believe it works. Just eat a bunch of it and wait. It does work, and faith sort of follows or flows therefrom. And it really isn't all that bad. I think the thing that scares off the newcomer is he can't conceive of sobriety except that terrible period between drunks, which he knows and despises. You can't really imagine until you've done it what our program can be like. Because sobriety now is a matter of freedom. Instead of being, as we visualize it, a walk through some dark, dank tunnel with no light, no joy, no Friday night parties, or some continual struggle up an arid mount carrying your cross of sobriety. Instead of that, it becomes a free and wild, damned party. When you're really free, because I was a slave to booze, and I think most alcoholics are, when you get free of it, you almost want to sing like that old hymn that King used to quote, free at last, great God Almighty, free at last. Because now we can do anything we want, no matter how wild, how exciting, how noble, how ignominious, lewd, lurid, anything you want. It's like some god set forth a feast of experience, physical, emotional, sensual, and said, take what you want, and then pay for it. And that way you find out whether you like it or not. And that really is about all I've discovered about myself. I used to think I had terrible, deep, dark problems when I got here. Now I look back on it through all my inventory taking, and about all I can discover is that I started drinking when I was an adolescent. 15. Now, adolescence is a form of insanity. You're absolutely crazy. It's the most horrible time in your life. The testosterone rush is on, and you're mad. You're crazy. Your body's changing in all different ways, and your mind, being a part of your body, is going crazy, and nobody else knows how to deal with you, and you don't know whether you're a grown-up or an adult, nor do they. And at that period, you start drinking. And alcohol is a wonderful preservative. You put a specimen in alcohol, come back 20 years later, still there, unchanged. You put alcohol in an adolescent, come back 20 years later. It changes. Your hair grays, your face wrinkles, you become educated beyond your intelligence. But emotionally, you stay that teenager. You never change because you have broken the learning process. We learn through the pain-pleasure principle. You do something wrong, you're punished. You do something right, you get joy and pleasure. Take alcohol or any other of these chemicals, and you get instant euphoria you didn't deserve. What do you learn through that? Nothing but guilt. You do something stupid and wrong, do you pay the price? No, you take more of it, and you feel more euphoria. You stop learning. See, people get up and say, alcohol used to be very good for me, it helped me to cope. Bull! Alcohol never helped any person do anything. It taught you how to exist without learning how to cope. See, people say, it made me a good dancer, it made me glib. Bull! Alcohol, dancing requires a certain amount of mechanical ability, and that goes when you drink. It's just that now you can step on people's feet and you really don't give a damn, because inside it feels pretty smooth. Alcohol doesn't make you glib, or as I've heard people say, then I could come on with the girlies. Alcohol makes you thick-tongued and stupid. And any girlie you could come on must have been smashed out of her eyeballs to have anything to do with you. You know, ladies sometimes come onto the program with rather dramatic stories that startle you because they remain the object of amorous pursuit even in their cups. But a good male alcoholic could come onto the program a virgin, for Christ's sakes. You know, I would be sitting in a bar stool, my heels would begin to go round. Any lustful female could obviously have had her will with me, and yet they resisted. They would look down at the bar, and here I was, ready to be had. and somehow they held back. But now sober, you take up where you left off. You stop being an adolescent, and you start growing up. The world doesn't end. Obviously, the world isn't going to rise up on tippy toes not to hurt your tender psyche just because you stop drinking. Everything is going to happen. People are going to die. People are going to reject you, abandon you. You're going to be shortchanged in your job or by other people from time to time. All the things that flesh is heir to are going to happen to you. No two-legged beast who ever got out of the forest has ever avoided frustration and disappointment. But you're going to live just like the rest of them do. The strange thing is that when you approach it with our program, most of the time it is comfortable and easy. And it can be so exciting if you are willing to try living without chemical courage. You know, I've been able to do everything I ever fantasized about and never did when I was drinking. And I have crazy fantasies. You know, delirium is the disease of the night. You should see some of the things I think of at 3 in the morning. But everything I ever thought about, I never did while I was drinking because I didn't have the courage, or the booze would send me off into some other grotesque errand. Now, sober, I've been able to do it because the higher power is such a beautiful scapegoat. You're no longer responsible in that sense. I haven't made a single mistake in decades. I mean, really, not the slightest faux pas. I have not made an error. I have not deviated from the path of rectitude in all of those years. On the other hand, God has seen fit to do through me some of the dumbest, most petty, selfish, rotten, egotistical things you could imagine. But if it gives him pleasure to make me look like a horse's ass, who are you to criticize? Because I really want to get out there and live. I want to know what's going on out there. Now, it may not be my program is so good. It may be that I'm just getting older. I don't have that many days left. You know, how many days do we have? Roughly 70 our allotment. You multiply 70 by 365, you only get about 25,000. That's all the days we have. And there's one trip we get on the blue-white globe they call the Earth. As far as we know, we only get 25,000 turns as our due. If someone gave you $25,000 and said, you've got to make it last, I don't think you'd wad it up by the handful and throw it down the toilet, flush it away. You can get money back, but you can never get a day back. I think the thing I despise most about my drinking was the days, the weeks, the months, the years I spent in sodden drunkenness, unaware of what the hell was going on, or sick, hospitalized, trying to get well, or caged like an animal because I'd done something antisocial, made a mess in society, rubbed my nose in it for a while, you know, or hostily trying to justify the next one. I don't have that much time left, and I want to know what's going on every single day, the bad ones as well as the good ones. I don't know why I say that. Most newcomers, of course, the newcomer does have to give up something, you know, because I think sometimes, why would he be frightened of it? What is the worst that can happen to him? The worst that could happen to him if he tried the program is he'd spend the rest of his life in full possession of his faculties. I know with your faculties that may be a threat, but you can learn to enjoy and exist with contentment. It isn't that awful. Oh, there is a price. You won't be able to be hip and slick and cool anymore. I mean, you won't be able to say, what's happening, man? I mean, shit, you'll know. But you can get out there and live. You know, a guy asked me, why is your program more happy or ebullient than mine? I'm kind of bored. I said, well, I don't doubt it's my program. Maybe I do more things than you do. He said, you learned how to fly since you've been sober? I said, no. I did. Went out to that old Whiteman airport down there in the valley and anachronistic old flight school, took 3 hours of training and soloed. 3 hours, soloed. Rented a plane that weekend, flew to San Francisco. It didn't have any instruments. I didn't know anything about navigation. I just flew over Highway 101. Hi, down there, baby. Let go, let God. Flew over and under the Golden Gate Bridge. It's the wonder they didn't shoot me down. I didn't know we weren't supposed to do that. You want to get excitement, try landing at International with no radio. I said, have you tried scuba diving? He said, no. I said, I did, I know you're supposed to learn, you get in a pool, you put on a snorkel, you get all those things, you train. I can't do that. I'm one of those, you hum a couple of bars, I pick it up. I put on all the gear, jumped in on Catalina Island, swam around down Seaweed City. It's gorgeous down there, really beautiful. I stayed down so long I ran out of air. I put my higher power to the test. I took my first free fall parachute jump about 15 years ago, just before I became a grandfather. I got through the male menopause racing motorcycles with Steve McQueen out a little further by Mojave, the only copy of the big book they used to see out there. I had to quit smoking some years back. You smoke 3 to 4 packs of Camels for 35 years, it'll do remarkable things to your lungs. My doctor finally gave me a mantra to repeat, emphysema. When you have to choose between smoking and breathing, it becomes the simplest thing you've ever done in your life. You just quit. I mean, get on your knees and bark like a dog for a month, but other than that, it's nothing. And they said I should get into running. Well, Christ, running, of all things I've despised in this world, running has to be at the bottom. I mean, when I was in the sports, they'd make you run laps if you goofed off. In the Army, they made you double time. Run. A fanatic as anybody, of course, was doing anything a week before I start. And I've always seen runners, usually old men with sweatbands and gnarled, knobby knees like tree roots, going along the side of the road. And I would think, poor, pathetic devils that it should ever come to that. When the craze hit about 10 years ago, they started to run right in my neighborhood. And hairy people usually. And I would think, God, I hope they don't steal anything. And now I'm absolutely astounded at the distinguished ladies and gentlemen one meets on the byways in the morning in their underwear, because now I'm into it. See, I went out there, hell, I couldn't go half a block when I started, but I kept it up, what the hell, we have a thing for pain anyhow, and, I kept it up, and I got up to 2 miles, and then I was on my way to a meeting one night, and I caught myself as I went down the walk to the car, skipping, dip, and I immediately stopped. I looked around and thought, Jesus God, I hope the neighbors didn't see that. I didn't skip as a boy. I've been called Mr. Gates since I was 13. My intimates used to call me Sir. I thought, what's wrong with you? And I realized the pain-pleasure principle was at work. You do something which is good for your body, and you now get the reward, pleasure. The oxygen was pumping, and those endorphins, which is a morphine-like substance that you get from exercise, had cut loose in my brain, and I was high. Now, no one had ever told me that. They'd told me running was good for me, which I took as a threat. No one had ever said it would make me feel good. They don't know how to communicate with me. Once I discovered that, good Lord, if 2 miles will make you feel good, how about 4, 8, 16? Within a year, I was up to half marathons. I had stress fractures, both feet, bursitis of the hip, my back went out. I didn't have a moment free from pain after I got healthy. But I kept at it naturally, and the body heals. And now I've run 3 marathons, 26 miles. That's a long ways. I run these 10Ks on a weekend, 6-milers. And the strange thing is, I have won every race I've ever been in. Isn't that incredible? Every damn race. I don't mean I came in first. I haven't the faintest idea what they do up in the front of the pack there. But at the rear, where we spiritual ones gather, we have classifications by, age and sex and occupation and so on. And I have broken my classification down even more narrowly than they do until finally I'm the only one in it. And by the way, that's the way it is. I am the only one in my category. There's nobody else. You're the only one in your category. Not just in these runs, but in life, you're the only ones in your category. You're not competing against me or anybody else. You're the only one in your category. You play the game, you bear the pain, you finish the race, and you're a winner. And so you win. I'm not recommending this for other people. I'm just talking about the freedom that it gives you. And I don't want to disappoint the newcomer entirely by making it look like it's all fun. It isn't. Hell, about 6 or 7 years ago, the woman I'd been married to for quite a while called to other things, I guess. Her higher power had her go elsewhere, and left me with a teenager that I'd had in my age. And I wasn't ready for that. I thought no good could come of this but break my heart in two. I'd like to tell you that this teenager, that he and I, by reason of our beautiful programs, communicated with one another. But men who say they communicate with their pubescent son, lie about other things as well. You're not supposed to talk to teenagers. In the first place, they're monosyllabic. They have no words. Their life is a horror, and they can't even communicate. I remember my daughters going through it, and they'd come home in tears. I'd say, "What's wrong, honey?" "That boy, what did he do?" "He looked at me." "How did he look at you?" "Funny." "What do you mean, funny?" "You're funny." They can't. They have no verbal means to speak. Oh, they go into their room and put on records that have primordial grunts from time to time, but communicative speech is not theirs. Hell, I didn't communicate with this boy. I lived in the back of the house. He lived in the front. The only time I saw him was to throw money in the hall. When he'd come out, I'd pounce on him. But he grew up, he went along, and he's off in college now and doing all right. And after a couple of years or so batching it, I met a beautiful young lady who decided to come in where angels fear to tread, and she joined me. She'd been sober 17 years. I don't monkey with newcomers, but she'd been around. She came on the program so young, it's still frightening to see me with such a young thing. But she seems to like me, and that's nice. She doesn't even object to old age creeping on her at night either. Which is nice. And my work is good. I love my work now. And it was hell. I remember, the lowest ebb in my life was about 25 years ago. I'd been around AA long enough to know that you can talk about your life and it isn't necessarily dreadful, that people will find merriment in it. They hadn't told me yet that you couldn't tell non-alcoholics your story, however, and they would find merriment in it. And so I went to a large law firm. I was looking for work, and I wanted them to love me. Not for my own sake. I'd outgrown the need for human approval. No, I wanted them to love me for the glory of your name, and so I would get a job. And so I told them parts of my story. The time I got drunk and threw my mother-in-law down the steps. And I don't mean boffo stories, just little light icebreakers. And how I got drunk. Being drunk, I fell after her and got a double hernia. And this guy who was interviewing me, he wasn't an AA member, and he didn't giggle a gig or titter a tit. He just kind of stared at me in kind of a horrified way. And I thought, I guess I am too subtle. So I told him about the time I was in 4-point restraint and vomited straight up. And that did get a reaction. And finally, however, I could see I wasn't getting home to him, so I said, "Now look, I'm not asking you to recommend me." And he said, "Recommend you? Recommend you? I wouldn't offer your name for consideration. No attorney in the history of this nation has ever done the things or had happen to him the things that have been done by and to you. I wouldn't think of offering you." When members of this firm walk into a courtroom, they represent integrity, strength in the face of adversity. Send you? Boy, I wasn't ready for that. I mean, I was crushed. I wanted to slither like a serpent across the floor and out to the nearest bar and drown the shame of that in that bottomless bottle, just like I always did. But I thought, if I do, that bastard will be right. He'll be right. I can't take it. And I'm not going to give him the satisfaction. Went out the old 6300 Club, drank coffee at him. About 10 years later, that guy flipped out. Cold sober. He just flipped out. He took the check protector, one of the secretaries, ran to Europe, disgraced the firm, his family, their legal profession. I mean, the pyrotechnics were extraordinary, and he did it cold sober. It was beautiful to watch. And a few years back, the governor of our state called me and told me he was going to appoint me to the appellate bench. As far as I know, the highest judicial office ever held by a sober alcoholic. You know what happens now when I walk into a courtroom and members of that firm are there? They stand up, and they remain standing till I tell them to be seated. All power to the powerless. And I haven't changed all that much in the years. Oh, I've changed. Obviously, I don't drink anymore. That's the greatest possible change that can be wrought in an alcoholic's life. And I've learned to laugh at myself. If you don't learn to laugh at yourself, by the way, you're going to miss the greatest joke in your generation. I want you to know that right now. And I think AA. Now, AA is a way of thinking that society doesn't understand. It goes against everything you have ever been taught. They do not understand total honesty. They do not understand making amends the moment you're wrong. They don't understand those things. I remember the first day I was sitting in court, and it was late in the afternoon, and my spirituality had begun to ebb, and my prostate had begun to flow, and I got irritated, and one young attorney talked longer than I thought he should, and I zinged him from the bench. I made the audience laugh. They thought I was being clever and funny, but it was at his expense, and they laughed at him. And I went home that night, and I couldn't stand it. I thought, what the hell's wrong with you? Here was this young guy. He's finally going to get to argue before an appellate court, and here are these black-robed judges up there, and he gets up and hangs onto the podium, and his voice breaks slightly as he begins to talk, and one of them leans forward and zings him and humiliates him. And I hated him. I just despised myself for it. And the next day I got out the phone book and I searched down. I finally found out who he was and where he was in his office. And I called him in his office and I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry for what I did. You wrote a wonderful brief, and I'm sure you'd have given a wonderful oral argument too if I hadn't have screwed it up for you. And I'm dreadfully sorry. I'm an old man, and young kids learn to ride bicycles. I'm learning to ride the bench, and I hope you'll forgive me. He was astonished. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Your Honor. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I not only made his day, I made his career. But I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it because our program says when you are wrong, you promptly admit it. It doesn't say unless you're a judge. You promptly admit it. They'd never had a judge do that before. I remember another time we were listening to some big murder case, and this attorney didn't want us to be too angry at his client, because the client, even though the client hadn't been entirely truthful when he had been arrested. And the guy, these black-robed figures, all very solemn except one, and I hear this one lean forward, because it's me, and say to him, do not worry, counselor, we all understand that one of the problems with murder is that it leads to lying. Fortunately, I didn't follow it up by saying, and if he keeps it up, he'll be in real trouble, he'll start drinking. Now, this program works. If you were to put my story on television, even in a soap opera, they'd laugh you off the air. There's no way you can get from the lockups and the horrors and the blackness to sitting on the highest court. It just can't happen. It's a miracle, meaning contrary to human experience. But that's what we expect in AA. Everyone here who stays sober will have a miracle. Mine is different, but is no greater. I heard Keith speak last night. From where he started to where he is today is a far bigger trip than mine. I would much rather see a person who abused his child stop it than see a man become a judge. This program has miracles for each and every one of us. I really hope no one leaves before they find out what theirs is. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control is connected. So pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.